So I gave a talk in San Diego, and Matt gave me my favorite feedback on a talk ever. We walked out, we went to happy afterwards. He goes, 30% of what you said I agreed with. The other 60%, your mother would be ashamed. And I wish I could do Matt's French accent to make it even more biting. I was like, damn, my mother would be ashamed? Hey, French people, math, I don't know. I'm not doing his math, okay? So I hope that some of you don't like this. I hope that you look at some of these ideas and you say like, no. Ideally, I want about 1 in 5 of you to walk out and be like, that was, I completely disagree. But hopefully in an intellectual way. So your views suck. My views suck too. If you looked at a Rails application from 2005, compared it to today, how would you update the view template? What are the steps to make a 2005 view template ready for Rails 3.0 at least, probably 3.1? And shout it out.
Rename it to .erb.
Yeah, rename .html to .erb, and that's it. That's what we've done in 6 years of innovation, right? We have spent absolutely no time on the view template, and really what the idea that I've been kind of wrestling with is moving away from the term view template and focusing more on the view layer. And I think to us as Rails programmers, we have models, they're Ruby classes. We have controllers, they're Ruby classes. And then we have like, oh, that view thing, yeah, whatever. You know, oh, it's got that template, it's in some directory, ERB, Haml, Holla. Get some Haml shout outs here, don't worry. But I think we can start to work on this. Why do we avoid the view template? It's hard. It's the only part of a typical Rails application that mixes 4 languages together. A CSS language, not really, but you know what I'm saying. Writing view templates is a tricky job. So I think we've seen a few people take stabs at it and do things with like Markabee and kind of object-oriented view templates. To me, that's not the way to go. I don't look at them and say like, yes, I love the nesting of object code. That kind of scares me a little bit. I think view templates are okay, but there's room for improvement in this view layer. So don't be scared. Like, don't just leave the view layer to the designers. Don't just punt it and say like, oh, computer science happens at the model. I totally used to say that. Okay. Controllers suck. We should just like barely have any code in the controller. You should say that. And then, but don't just say view templates, like somebody else deal with it. Just write, put some more injections in there, put some code, it'll be okay. We can work on the view layer and make it better. One of my first objections to our implementation of the view layer are instance variables. The implementation of how data gets from a controller to a view is, I feel bad when I teach Rails classes and I have to try and explain it to people. Like, well, the controller and the view, you know, we just did all this talk about context, variable context, and the controller and view don't share context, so you can't like have a local variable from your new action show up in your new template because they don't share context. But, well, yeah, if you make it an instance variable, yeah, they still don't share context, but it's just there. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the implementation. More questions for you. Anybody have an idea what you would see if you did this in a view template? I hope you're like, question mark over your head, because I had no idea. And this is the answer. It's not stopping. What? That's for a really trivial little application that I just wrote with some people who've been doing Rails for one day. It's 51,000 characters long, that string of the context of a view. It's this kind of like anonymous class instance where the instance variables have been copied over from the controller. And I'm not trying to point fingers at the implementation of Rails. I love Rails. But I'm just saying that we have more. We could do more thinking here. There's room for growth. In theory, we talk about the Rails MVC model like this. Request down to the router, the controller, model database, back to model, back to the controller up to the view, and out to the user. But in reality, the controller and view components, there's more to it. They kind of have an unfair job because they really have two responsibilities, and Uncle Bob wouldn't be happy about that. There's no like two responsibility principle. The controller is, on the way down, responsible for understanding the request, grabbing those parameters and doing things with them. And then on the way back up, it provides this really half-assed data interface to the view template. It provides data out to the view template or the view layer. And this part is really what's lacking. When you get to the view layer, you've then really got two steps there: preparing the data for output. So, doing things like taking a timestamp and formatting it into your designer's preferred style, whatever you do in helpers. And then combining that data with the template and outputting plain HTML to your user. So the controller supplies the data, and then in the view layer, we have these two jobs. But the line between controller and view, we don't really have model, view, controller. It's like model, pause, view controller. Like they are completely conjoined. If you're looking at a view template, which is our representation of the view layer, how do you know what data is available to you? If I were working with Ruby objects, I could query an object, ask it what methods it has, what public methods it has, etc. If you're in a view, if you're thinking about the view context, how do you figure out what data is available to you? Look at the controller, right? Go in the controller source code and look at it. That's the definition of coupling, right? Like the only way you can find out what my interface is by looking at my source code. Oh, sweet. Okay. An interface is a good idea. It doesn't just mean that we have to all go write Java and we have to have the interface and the interface implementation and the interface implementation instance and so on and so forth. An interface is a contract between two objects that explains how they are allowed to interact with each other. Right now, our views and our controllers don't have an interface. They interact with each other however they feel like. And if you really go wrong, and maybe you're a PHP person, I don't blame you, welcome, then you start interacting with your model from the view, so even hopping through the controller. So there's truly no interface between those layers. To say we have a separation of MVC is more about, we have separated files, but we don't have separated concepts. They pretend to share that context, but really the instance variables, if you don't know this, when render is called from the controller, what it does is it queries itself for all of its instance variables, instantiates the context of the view, and then copies those instance variables over, okay, which can be very expensive, like thousands of objects getting created and destroyed. So how can we improve? One approach that I think is pretty cool, I'm a little surprised it hasn't caught on more yet. I see a lot of books, but I don't see the Rails, pause, three-way around here. This is explained in the Rails three-way book. Pretty nice set of code called Decent Exposure, comes out of HashRocket in Florida. And it works it helps you define an interface between your controller and view. A traditional controller and view might look like this. Okay. Nothing too interesting. When you use decent exposure, you call the expose method. You give it a name for the resource, and then you give it an optional block about how to query for that resource. What it does is then define a method on the controller and provide that method as a helper method from the object. So then in your view, you save one character. Okay? It's not about reducing code, it's about reducing coupling. When you cut off that character, your concept completely changes. We're no longer manipulating this instance variable magically copied over from some other object. We are now calling a method provided to us. Okay? So expose generates these helper methods, provides them to you, you use them from your view. There's really not a lot of change in your view template. Okay? But from an object-oriented perspective, it's totally different. So the wins you get from decent exposure is a simple interface. It also takes care of a lot of the complex controller logic. There's some little shortcuts in there that can cut your controllers down a lot. Similar to using like inherited resources or one of those plugins, but I think decent exposure does it in a really clean way. And best of all, you don't have instance variables littered all over your views. So section number 2, kill helpers. I have this thing against helpers. I don't like controllers, but I really hate helpers. Well, no, I hate people that don't write. No, I don't hate people, but I wish people wrote more helpers, but then I wish they also had something better to do than write helpers. Okay? You'll see where I'm going with that. When we write Ruby, everything's an object. I love when I teach people Ruby, people who are brand new to Ruby, one of my favorite examples for them is to show them a for loop, like a Java or C style for loop, for int I equals 0, I less than 5. And I try and get them to say that as a sentence, and I write it down, for int I equals 0, I less than 5, I plus. What does that junk mean? Nothing. That's computer talk, right? In Ruby, we can do beautiful things like 5.times do, and that's possible because everything is an object. In Rails, we've got objects everywhere. A Hello World Rails application, actually going back to Matt, Matt was showing me this middleware that he worked on that tracks how many objects are created and destroyed during a request and how many times the garbage collector fired. And it's like, I think the number was 8,000 objects. I should double check, but your Rails request creates a lot of objects. Rails is obsessed with objects. And then at the very last minute, right as we prepare this data for the user, we're like, oh, let's forget this object-oriented thing. Just call some procedures. And helpers are essentially procedural programming. Nothing wrong with procedural programming, but it's just incongruent that we have objects, 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 and then procedures. It's kind of strange. So the job of data processing, preparing data for the presentation is important. In the hypothetical case, when people explain to you what helpers are good for, one of the examples that I usually hear and I even use myself is, oh, your timestamps. Your timestamps come out of the database with the hour, the date, the UTC offset and all that, and you can't show that to a user, right? They don't want to see that ugly, grotesque 86-character thing. They want to see Monday, September 12th, 2010, whatever. So you write a helper, pass the timestamp into that helper, generate beautiful output. Okay, that's the idea. But in reality, what I think most people do are build object-specific helpers. They don't very often, I think driven primarily by the controller generator creating helper files named after the controllers, then people think about helpers being linked to controllers and models, therefore they write a helper for use with just one model most of the time. If we're gonna write object-specific code anyway, why not do it in an object-oriented way? So instead of using helpers to do something like this, right? Say I have a user object, I might have a print user method that when I'm in the US locale, it does first name, space, last name, and in Canada, I don't know why, it's last name, comma, space, first name, right? So those are the kind of helpers that I write frequently. What if instead I could do something just like that? Okay. I hope that makes you uncomfortable, right? How would you implement that? Right now, in a normal Rails app, how would you implement print name like that? Put it in the model, right? And I've done that. I'm not ashamed, I'll admit it. I've done that. I usually draw the line when I want to get HTML. If it's last name, comma, space, first name, I'll do it in the model. I'm not ashamed. Okay? When I start thinking like, man, I wish there was a span in there, that's like, okay, stop. It's getting out of control. Okay? It's a good idea that we could call user print name, but the only place we have to implement it is down in the model, and that's unfortunate. What about another one like format time to format a beautiful timestamp? What if instead we could just say user created at, and it would take care of the formatting for us? To do that, again, you could override a method down in the model, right? You could define your own created at and then call super and do stirf time on it and all that. But it's not appropriate. The model is not about presentation. The reason, the challenge here is a symptom of the fact that our view layer just means view template, because our view layers don't have enough intelligence. So I started thinking about the decorator pattern, and decorator pattern in general would go like this: take a data model and then add on some view-specific methods to it. Okay. And then I would probably want to make use of Rails helpers, like link to, content tag, pluralize, all those kinds of things that you tend to do in both helpers and view templates. But I want to do it in a view object. I don't take a lot of inspiration from the Microsoft world. No offense to anybody. Once again, welcome. In some Microsoft framework, they have model, view, view model, view-model. And at first I heard that, I was like, stupid. I was like, wait a second. That's kind of a good idea. What if we had models that were part of the view? What if we had objects that were part of the view layer? And this is where I went with the decorators. So I started thinking about, all right, let me make a folder, right? Things got a nice logical place in a Rails application. So I'll make this app decorators folder, and then I'm going to create these decorator classes that what they do is take in one of my data objects and add presentation methods to it. Wrap them up. Okay? And once I started thinking about how that could work, at first I was going with formatting things, simple things like that. And I started thinking, what are other problems we have at the view layer? One of them that I see a lot of people starting to struggle with is, I'm providing an API. I want to send out JSON of my resources, but I want to send out different JSON depending on whether you're an administrator, you're an authenticated user, or you're a public user, right? How do you do that? It's kind of hard. Like you probably are going to implement a method down in the model, and then you're going to pass the current user or the current user's role down from way up top on the view, like down through the controller, down into the model, muck around with the data, and push it back up. But really, that's not so different than the way we tweak our view templates for those users. The same way that you don't show an edit link to an unauthenticated user, but you do show it to an administrator, that's the same problem. So why have a totally different solution? And so I thought about if we had this model at the view layer, we could then implement those methods up there. It could have access to both the data from the model, the authentication and authorization information from higher up, the controller and the views, mix it up, figure out which data should be presented, and output it. I was also curious about enforcing an interface. Ruby is very much, when I work with people coming from other programming languages, I think one of the first realizations they have as they start writing Ruby is like, wow, you can do like anything. You can open any class and like rewrite fixnum on the fly. You can. It's probably a terrible idea, but you can do it, right? We really embrace freedom and flexibility, but maybe that's not always the right thing to do. I'm not sure. I'm still kind of wrestling with this idea a little bit, but I was inspired by adder accessible or adder protected down in the model layer. With Active Record is pretty permissive. You make some columns in the database, and by default, you can just send anything you want from a form. Just make a hash and send it down to me. I'll store it in there. But you can, as a programmer, and I hope you do, add adder accessible and define which of those can actually be mass assigned. What if we took kind of the same approach to your views and said, all right, view, or view template, I should say. View template, here is your data object, and you're allowed to call on this data object these 8 methods. You are not allowed to call find. You are not allowed to call other things find by SQL. I have seen this in views, find by SQL, and I'm like, no, right? I'm going to say what you are allowed to do, and then do whatever you want. I'll give you a few pieces, and you do what you want. Okay? We could enforce an interface. And so I started working on this project I call Draper, and it's an implementation of how I see decorators or view models in Rails. And I've really been enjoying it. It's the first gem I ever wrote that other people wanted to use. And so that's cool. Thanks. I know Steve's been working on it a little bit. I got a few shout outs from HashRocket that they're using it in a project. And I think there are cool ideas there. So if we get done, or if you catch me sometime during the day today, I'd love to show you how it works. Next section, view templates. What about views as API customers? There was a great article, I think it was like a year ago. Anybody read this? Basically said the web, as you think of it, downloading HTML is dying. It's becoming video, it's becoming media, it's becoming APIs. And especially among this community, if you launch a website or a web application, somebody's go, oh, cool, is there a gem for the API? And if you say, oh, there's no API, people go, oh, cool. Good luck, right? If you're launching an application in 2011, 2012, it's got to have an API. APIs are kind of a pain in the ass because you build your whole web interface for those browser people, and then you have to build the whole API interface for these programmer nerds, right? But is that division necessary? What if the controllers didn't care about the output format? What if the job of the controller, if the controller had a proper interface, maybe it could just do its data gathering that it does from the model, get that data and say, here's my data. And then the view template could be in charge of deciding, oh, I'm generating HTML, let me take that data and do this with it. Or I'm generating JSON, let me do this other thing with it. Controllers maybe shouldn't care about their output format. Maybe controllers should put out the same data. We could get rid of this respond to and respond with and blah, 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 all that stuff, and just provide the same data all the time. We could treat those view templates like just normal API customers. So here's a traditional request response sequence. Back in the day, by which I mean like the 80s, these machines, right, were like, whoa, server, oh my God, it's got 2 processors. And these sad things over here, like, right, and they were very, very sad little machines. Today, my laptop is probably faster than my server. I don't even know. It's like, what is my server? It works. I don't even know what the hardware is anymore. When we set up this sequence, it puts all the work here on the right side. So I have invented here a unit of measure called the green box. And I don't know what these green boxes mean, but let's just say that having more green boxes is slower than having fewer green boxes. So most of the boxes are over here on the server side. The client sends out this request, and then we've got multiple cores of multi-gigahertz processors and 8 gigs of RAM sitting here. Please send me some data. Please spin, 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 spin. And then a long time later, finally, some response comes. And this is actually kind of sad, right? We're wasting time. If the controller provided a detailed interface, a defined interface, sorry, the decorator could then consume that data, take in that model data, and prepare it for output. Okay? The client could then receive that JSON, a template, so you got data, template, and then an engine, and render the data once you put those 3 pieces together. We can pass everything down to the client and take advantage of all this processor power. What that would allow us to do is something like this. Request, response, router, controller, model, all that's the same. And then, instead of sending them finished HTML, send them a template, send them the assets, send them the data, and then they mix it all together. So in my highly scientific diagram, I have saved one green box over here by pushing things over to that side. But what is cool is that this has also shrunk by one box. So the user can start seeing stuff happen faster. The time to first response shrinks. Okay? So I started thinking about this Sunday, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's kind of cool, I guess. And you know, this is the approach we're seeing with Backbone.js and all those things, and all the JavaScript people that are coming to take our jobs. We see you. Okay? But what if we took it a step further? What if we totally rethought how this templating worked? And I started thinking about this with Yehuda's article, now quite old, I guess a year old, about automatic flushing. And this is not like at the airport where the toilet flushes for you. This is where your Rails page, as components are ready to go, get sent out piecemeal. That Rails won't necessarily wait for the whole page to be ready. It'll go like, oh, the head's ready? Okay, head. Oh, the navigation's ready? Nav. Body, content? Okay, footer, send them all parts. So if we could send our content out piecemeal, how could that affect this strategy? Using flushing, we could go this way. Okay. Request comes in, hits the router controller, and before the controller even starts doing queries down to the data layer, it knows what view template it's going to render. Yes, there's the case of what if there's a internal server error and all that. I don't write bugs, so I don't have to deal with those things, but maybe you do. Okay, so before the controller even starts kicking off these queries against the very slow database, it could start sending out the template response. It knows which template will eventually be sent, and so it could just send it. It knows for that template which JavaScript assets are necessary. It could send them too. And then, as that query comes back from the very slow database, send out the data response. Now the client has the three pieces. They could also take care of the data formatting in that JavaScript engine and have their HTML. The number of green box measure from top to bottom is still just one less for them. Okay. The time to first response is very small. So this template, your average page is mostly template. Right? There's not that much data on your average page. You've got all your Chrome, your sidebar, your nav, and all that. They could see that almost instantly and then just wait a quarter second, a tenth of a second as these other parts are coming down. But the truth is, I don't really care about the client that much. A lot of these people use Internet Explorer, right? They don't care. But I do care about this guy, right? I care about the server because A, I have to pay for it, and B, nobody says like, oh yeah, my response time's really slow. I'm a really good web programmer. You go like, oh yeah, my response time's like -milliseconds, man. If we move all the green boxes from over here to over here, we can now fit twice as many requests in this space, right? I originally had like 8 here. I now got 4 vertically. I can serve twice as many requests in the same time. Okay, so how do we do that? Just draw your boxes and then your stuff works. It's a great plan. I will leave that to you. Hack night tonight. No. Some ideas. We write an interface, retrieve the data from the model, render out just plain JSON, and then use that JSON whether we're talking about HTML, we're talking about APIs, we don't care. Pass that down to the client along with a rendering engine that knows how to combine the data, template, and any formatting logic. And that's it. So what is a rendering engine? There are a few approaches to rendering templates on the client. There's a plain HTML with jQuery. You could just send them HTML and then send them some jQuery. You could put jQuery down in the footer if you wanted and then do some replacements that way, but it gets pretty ugly pretty fast. There's mustache templates, which I almost like. I want to like them, but something about the curly bracket and a slash, it hurts my eyes. I don't know. Okay. A little improvement on mustache, and this is actually my flavor of choice here, is handlebars. Worked on by Yehuda. It is the templating format for Sprout Core. So if you use this in your Rails app, you have a really easy upgrade path if in the future you decide Sprout Core is the bomb and you want to do everything client-side, which is nice side benefit. And then there's this other library that actually has really nice code, and I cannot use it. I can has JS. Sorry. And the guy, the author of it sent me a tweet and he's like, you don't like my whimsical name? Like, I'm sorry, man. It's too much. If you implemented this approach, we'd do less processing on the server side. We'd have a faster time to first response. And most importantly to me, you would, since you're treating your views as API customers, even for normal HTML people, you no longer have this divide between, oh, this is our website and this is our API. You just have API. I want less work, right? I don't like doing things twice. Why do them twice? Just have API, provide API to everyone, and let your HTML people be API customers. So, wrap it up. We got that. Instance variables, hate them. I love models in the view layer, use decorators. I might be able to show it to you while I'm answering questions. You could unify your controllers, no longer have this divide between HTML and API, just have it be all API, and then let JavaScript do its job. Send the hard work down to the user because their machine is just sitting there like, please let me do something, please let me do something. Give them the work, all right? So Jumpstart Lab is my company. My name is Jeff Casimir. That is my Twitter name. It is not for sale. Sorry, you can't have 2 letters. And I teach the best Ruby and Rails classes on earth. So if you or your company need that kind of thing, let me know. All right, so question me. I got, what, 8 minutes, right? Something like that? Sweet. Yes, thank you.
Here you go. Part one, actually it's a two-parter, is you talked about implementation of the API versus the HTML interface.
Yes.
One company that did a really interesting job of that was a company called Podio. They make the social collaboration as a service. And they basically wrote it, and then they figured out what the API needed to be, scrapped the whole thing, re-implemented the API, and then built everything on top of it. The API they exposed to developers is pretty much on absolute parity with what they internally use.
Yeah.
Although that really sucks to have to build it right now.
Right.
So just if we're looking for real-world examples of people having done that,
Sure.
that exists. And then I guess my second question was, I'm not a super Rails view hacker, but it seemed that
There is no such thing as a Rails view hacker. Go on, though.
I've seen quite a few hackers. It seems like you're advocating for decorating the model class, and I was wondering, is it appropriate to decorate the model, or would it be more appropriate to decorate a singleton that's an instance of that? Why hit the method on the class versus moving on to an instance of the class?
B, I think, is what I'm doing.
Okay.
I think we're on the same page there.
All right.
So I've got a little sample app spun up. This is just a really simple blog engine we built during my intro Rails class. And I can show you quickly how to implement a Draper decorator. So first step is to install a dependency. I'm running it off my local repository. A lot of people don't know that with Bundler, you can map to paths, which is really handy when you're developing 2 things at once. Okay, so come over, Control-C, bundle. Bundle should process, all right. Start my server back up. And then I now have a new generator available. Say Rails generate, you'll get the list of all generators available, including now Draper model. I'm actually I have it almost ready to commit. I'm going to rename it to Draper decorator, because originally it was like it's draping the model, but instead like, well, we're generating, so what we are generating is the decorator. Huh? I got you. It just took me a while. It took me a while. I'm going to put some drapes over everything. I'll take it. I'll take any jokes I can get. Generate Draper model, and then I'm going to decorate an article class. I tell people never live code. I live code for a living, so it's okay. I don't have to follow these rules. It will generate for you 2 classes the first time, an application decorator and then an article decorator. So everything, all your decorators inherit from application decorator, inspired by application controller, of course. Then over in your app, you get a decorators folder. Okay. I put lots of notes in there about different things you can do. You can enable lazy helpers, which I'll show you in just a second. So I got article decorator. This is what it looks like. You can't see that much of it, but let me shrink it down a little bit. Article decorator inherits from application decorator. It calls the decorates method to set what model type it is decorating to allow you to create decorators which don't necessarily match the name of the decorated model. I'm thinking that down the road, you might want to do something like article decorator, and then you might want to have article XML decorator, article JSON decorator. Maybe you want to subclass it that way. And so decorates specifies which article you're going to create. And some usage in here. I'll just, as I do with most comments, delete them. Hate comments. Okay. So then it's like, all right, let me use this decorator. In the controller, in this articles controller, I've got a find article before filter. So my change is to change article find to article decorator.find. I proxy find if you pass it a string or integer, proxy that down to active record and do the find for you. So you don't necessarily have to do the find and then wrap it. Okay. So you do that, and then your page should load still. Okay, fine. Seems okay. Let me do something cool, such as, bow. Okay, when you generate a folder while the server's running, it doesn't get added to the load path, which is not shocking, right? So you got to restart the server, just the first time. Not every time you make a change, not every decorator you generate. So I start it up. Refresh, okay, so it's still pulling this up. One thing I was playing with last night were links here. So I've got just basic delete, edit, back to all articles links. In my view template, articles, I wrote ERB, okay? Yeah, I was being nice. Refactoring is my favorite sport, and it is not, you know, I think a lot of people look at refactoring and think of it as reducing code, and it's not about reducing code. It's about reducing complexity while improving clarity. This thing is not clear. It is complex, right? I hate writing delete links, and then I have to go through and explain to people how the Rails.js works, and it searches for this attribute to do a click handler, to generate a form on the fly that has a method delete, and people are like, oh yeah, okay, great. I just want to delete stuff. What I wish I could do here was, instead of having all that and getting the format right, I wish I could just say article.delete link. Okay? And obviously that's not going to work. Okay? And this is a method on the instance. So I go over to my decorator, I say def delete link, and paste it in, change this to self, and it still doesn't work, right? Article path and link to are not defined unless, I didn't want to, the act of getting access to the helpers, to the built-in Rails helpers and to the helpers, built-in Rails helpers were easy. Helpers that you define, like in your application helper, really god awful. And I really thank Xavier Shea, who's on his way to the US right now, who wrote this code that I do not understand at all. 2, 1, okay, 1 minute. I don't understand this code at all, and it allows you to get access to the helpers. So I give it to you by a proxy called h, and you can say h.link to h.article path, and now your link comes back, and it still works, okay? Guess I could click it, okay, it still works. And then you say, I don't like this H litter all over. Okay, you wanna have a really kind of polluted namespace, I'll let you do that. You go lazy helpers, and then down here now all the helpers are available to you in the local namespace, okay? So you can like copy and paste code almost, change variable references, and you're good to go, okay? So reduce complexity in your view. So from 3 lines of garbage to 1 method, okay? I think there are lots of cool potential here, and I would love you to use it and tell me what parts of it suck. Somebody pointed out, they're like, oh, but it's tricky with if you use devise and can right now, like it's hard to get access to those things. Like, oh, okay, we'll fix it. So we'll fix it. If you just tell me what to fix, I'll fix it. Okay? So thank you.